Alright, everyone ready to go?
Happy.
Megan?
Yeah, I'm good.
Great.
Okay, I'm gonna handle the drugs. So.
United States military presence is not a homogenous collective of firepower that arises out of nowhere. It's generated through specific domestic processes of warfare that disproportionately funnel young black and brown people into the front lines of combat by presenting military service as their only option. The severe conditions that force enlistment are themselves enforced by the military, one of the primary domestic policing organs responsible for suppressing slave rebellions and warring against indigenous peoples. The situation is not simply the result of poor economic conditions and political disenfranchisement. White supremacy actively mandates that only white bodies matter, justifying the mass production of black death in service of protecting white life. Therefore, our task is twofold: to resist the material conditions that force military enlistment and the ideological conditions that enforce the mattering of white bodies. This is SpIr 2004. There's been a draft going on for a while, one that has been successful in maintaining military enlistment despite progressive critique. There's the poverty draft. The hostage military is one of the few options to get basic needs, but the poverty draft has been more successful in getting people of color, particularly blacks, in the military than any forced draft. Parents tell me about how their child went in the military against their wishes, enticed by a school counselor or military recruiter who's omnipresent in their kid's school. Military does this through a series of tricks and an annual budget of $2.7 billion for recruitment alone, which is funneled into various youth-friendly packages such as hip-hop material, video games. The U.S. downplays the devastation it's responsible for in non-white communities. The military has been a major force in maintaining slavery, suppressing slave rebellions, taking over indigenous lands and bodies, suppressing and incarcerating black and brown bodies during the LA riots, or helping in incarceration when blacks are then forced to work for a military system that has shaped the contemporary situation. They find themselves trying to deal with some bodies matter more than others. It is the non-white body that is treated as non-human in a white supremacist world. It is only white bodies that matter. The moral crisis ignores the fact that non-white bodies have been shouldering the burden of war, militarization, and enlistment for centuries. Therefore, the struggle is twofold. First, to address the larger issues that force communities of color into the U.S. military, issues that the U.S. military is responsible for helping to maintain. Second, it is imperative that activists have a larger conversation about bodies that matter and who the military is aggressively recruiting. Now, military service exists coextensively with slavery and incarceration as strategies by which black bodies are made fungible and expendable, literal cannon fodder for whiteness's military campaigns of colonial expansion. Of course, this service, however, is not docile subservience to the white masters. Black GIs were in fact the most militant resistors of military authority, especially during the Vietnam War. Violent uprisings and attacks against their superior officers devastated military effectiveness, forcing withdrawal for the military's very survival. In other words, black revolutionary violence is a wrench in the machine that disrupts the possibility of military presencing altogether. Courtright, 1990. One of the least known but most important chapters in the history of Vietnam is the internal rebellion that racked the U.S. military. The armed forces faced widespread unrest, morale, and discipline, sank to record lows in 1971. There were 17 AWOLs and 7 desertions for every 100 soldiers. Harsher forms of rebellion also occurred: violent uprisings, refusal of orders, even attacks against superiors. The result was a severe breakdown in military effectiveness. The armed forces had to be withdrawn for their very survival. The most militant resistors were black GIs. Blacks faced greater oppression than whites who fought back. The rebellions that shook Watts, Newark, and Detroit erupted at major military installations. Just a few years later, the result was a military torn by racial rebellion. Institutionalized discrimination was widespread. Job assignments of primary concern for black GIs, and the reports confirmed what the soldiers already knew. They were disproportionately assigned to dead-end positions, especially in combat. The extensive warpath of the military campaign throughout the 20th century had the unintended effect of spreading this radicalization of black revolutionary thought across the globe. Instead of viewing colonized people as the enemy to be exterminated, black soldiers developed a critical consciousness of the need for solidarity and resistance among oppressed peoples. Phillips 12. Many African Americans consider that high plaudits of the military's evidence of inequality and thwarted their struggles for racial justice. African American questioned militarism war demands gathered mass political forces. Young men were disproportionately compelled in the military's experience violence and terror. Black troops became the foundation for anti-war deeds, generated black critical and political consciousness about the relationship between these wars and brought in racial violence home. This book addressed the impact of combat on African Americans' understanding racial violence as a global phenomenon. African Americans measured their struggles against the larger global struggles of oppressed people. The overlapping wars at home and abroad have formed a critical collective consciousness. War pitted them against the struggles of colonized people. Attention to this critical consciousness then influenced the anti-war and anti-violence activism, challenges the conception of the critical war, and military largely intellectuals and progressive journalists. Blacks, grassroots anti-draft, anti-war movements included women in prominent roles, and we must rethink a narrative of the movement that ignores ordinary African-American resistance to the racial inequalities that compel them to enlist the nation's organized systemic violence, and war cannot be simply a backdrop to black freedom struggles. Appeals and resources used for war simultaneously invalidated nations, considered and tolerated systematic violence against them. Now, this resistance also occurred in more indirect ways as well, including outside of the military military itself, black communities developed counter-recruitment strategies and anti-draft efforts that sought to prevent the availability of young black people for enlistment. This history of resistance is not parallel to the more publicized white peace movement. It explicitly developed towards the opposite trajectory, a program of destruction rather than restitution. Phillips and 12. Radical black anti-war activists signaled a critical consciousness which the white peace movement was unable to organize rhetoric to practice. The peace movement not expansive enough to include black communities, so the white communities did not acknowledge the differing experience of African Americans. Stokely Carmichael used the national media to make statements about war. There is nothing wrong with violence. It is just he was able to control it. When McNamara says he is going to draft 30% of black people out of the ghettos, that is nothing but urban removal. The choice is very clear. You either suffer or you inflict suffering. Either you go to the penitentiary or you become a killer. To hell with this country. The white left is not fighting for its survival. They want to save America. We have to burn America down. In order for black people to survive, America must be destroyed. Black activists encourage black soldiers not to fight against the Vietnamese. The Black Panther Party worked to regenerate communities. Anti-war activists played a prominent role. Black anti-war activists created strategies to stop the war by organized communities to protest the draft and recruitment. This organization would address concerns ignored by the white anti-war efforts. The large march of the peace movement, Patton observed, did not change the lot of black men who were being drafted into a racist genocidal war. The black anti-draft effort focused on disruption of official activities. Now, these domestic political organizations do not occur in a stable, peaceful homeland and normal civic discourse. They were always met with myriad of attempts at suppression from the dominant white majority, which required deft, tactical, and strategic navigation of a profoundly anti-black world. This ongoing conflict between white and black is the condition of war itself in America. Even the Civil War was not simply a competition between two lily white armies, as the history books might claim. Slave rebellions and other forms of resistance, particularly by black women, were essential to the defeat of the Confederates. This illustrates a larger historical point. Black people are made to be the principal enforcers of state policies on the ground, which means they occupy the ideal position for insurrection. Glymph 13. Rose's War suggests the ways the process of emancipation was slaves, women included, took up arms to defeat slave-holding empires. Historian Lard argued the Emancipation Proclamation did not really free anyone, but we act as if self-emancipation was a simple, uncomplicated act with little attention to what the process looked like on the ground. It's time to send the slaves to war contributed nothing. We were too old to remember, however, that enslaved women waged war against individual slaveholders in Confederate state in myriad ways. They fought as combatants and non-combatant civilians and partisans. The part they played in wars largely been overlooked. The story of the Pine Bill eternity provides a path to consider what the slaves did in political terms and refuse the assumption that slaves who did not flee were somehow less politically acute rather than men and women who were key to slavery's destruction. Black people like Rose constituted the principal enforcers of emancipation policies on the ground. The slaves' war in Pineville was not an anomaly. Black positionality thus represents not a reduction of military presence, but its intensification. The body becoming the site of absolute dereliction and phobogenic investment. America itself is and creates this antagonism, the unthought, ongoing civil war. The advocacy takes up this situation as opportunity for a program of complete disorder and insatiable revolutionary violence. Wilderson 7. Fanon writes the colonization of the program of complete disorder. No, the body functions of the repository of complete disorder. The black body black inside of absolute dereliction for the magnetized was the black body functions of the map of gratuitous violence through which civil society possible. Whoever says rape says black, whoever says prison says life. The Negro is phobogenic object did not be cause for lament. Truly, revolutionary move scrap the invitation of social death, oppositional political ties, and anti-black meaning alliance with death, like liberation, makes the radicals more dangerous to the U.S. Its condition of possibility, conjecture, resistance, function, of political refusal to affirm cleavage disorder, woman experience disorder, incoherence. If one's politics to be underwritten by a desire to take down this country, I'll mark that shit a country.
Shit. And bullets are barbarians to be able to make black life sentences. Golden gray chains, they come for the degenerates. Niggas living in ignorance, grenade pen came from my penitent. We was shackled at the ligament criteria, so become so damn rigorous. I said, fly above the game, but we got the dang wings of Icarus. So I'm asking all these questions like my nigga who the victor is. Is it the house nigga or maybe the Uncle Thomas slave behind the whip? Or the one that decides to be able to lay on the master's arm? Never be able to fight for what was right, but do the shit for what is wrong. Plantations be like sex, nigga, what block you claim? Niggas be putting I'm funkin', I swear to God I ain't playing. We be banging like F.L. Block, we put that shit with a fragrance. Fuck though, I'm fellow nigga on his corpse, I swear to God it's gonna piss on it while it's decaying. Never actually go to court unless you hooping. Fuck a nigga if he comes down my street trying to be whooping. Run up on the block, leave that shit ruined. There is a war going out here. We fighting each other, we never unify. We see each other as the other. So we trying to get buckets and I'm dumping out the bucket on another motherfucker like fuck it.
Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess
the wrong beat.
I'm kind of confused what the processes are that the app defends to kind of break down white supremacy. Can you unpack those for me?
Insurrection in militarized spaces by black individuals.
Will you explain what that does, how that operates?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of examples of this. So, like, the Courtright evidence talks about when black GIs turned against their commanders in Vietnam, it forced the military to withdraw because they were unable to maintain an effective, coherent morale. The other example is the Phillips evidence, which talks about solidarity amongst oppressed peoples. Black anti-war activists would encourage black soldiers to not fight the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong would target white soldiers and let black soldiers go in some instances, which demonstrate that there was insurrectionary potential even in institutions of domination, because black people are positioned as the enforcers
that makes some sense
of
in the context of the military.
US
Then,
policies.
can you give examples in the context of the United States itself?
Tell me what you mean.
So I guess
You
both
mean
your examples
outside of
are about
military
Vietnam, yeah,
institutions?
outside of military.
Okay, sure. So like the big part of that is the importance of counter recruitment efforts, right? So like America itself has institutions designed to funnel black people into the military to be made expendable. Black anti-war activists and political organizers domestically, like the Black Panther Party, created strategies to avoid the draft and help black men and women escape it. Our affirmative works as a counter-recruitment tool in debate, because our NOPR evidence says that educational spaces are a critical site of that militarization of thought and enlistment. So
What is
literally
the
we are
connection
saying
between the militarization of thought and physical militarization, right? Given that we don't have a draft right now, it seems like the people in this
there
space...
is a draft.
There is a
right now.
draft.
That's
The
the
draft
first-
is not
Recruitment
implemented right
strategies
now.
don't stop.
The first
It
line of
seems
our 1AC
that-
is that there is a draft for non-white bodies.
Okay,
Niggas.
I guess I'm confused what the militarization of thought in debate, how that links to the physical militarization aspect.
Well, I mean, I think the more accurate phrasing would be the militarization of debate. Our argument is that debate is a militarized space. So it's not that people read the HDA is not the primary link argument. The primary link argument is that debate is a space structured in favor of the mattering of white bodies, which
Okay.
is what our NOPR evidence
Fair enough.
identifies as.
I actually do want to ask a question about the NOPR evidence real quick. It talks about the kind of poverty draft. Why would your counter insurrections challenge things like the poverty draft? Like, it seems
That's
like there's
exactly
still
what it
a bunch of
challenges.
socioeconomic disparities that deem that poverty draft as necessary. I guess, will you walk me through how
The
counterinsurgency
poverty
challenges that?
draft is the process by which poor black people are presented with the military as their only option.
Right,
Our
my
argument
question is how
to,
your insurgency challenges that.
It directly challenges that by revolting against the militarized institutions that force them into that position. Our argument is that wars domestically force them to do that the military engages in.
Actually, ask you a question.
Okay.
Yo, Peters, if y'all ain't flowing, bro, I'm gonna kill you next time I see you. Just letting you know.
Are the rest of these lights off for a reason?
No, I don't know how to turn them on though.
There's, switch in the back. There's one up here I can mess with.
Okay, I guess that's a pretty good reason.
Okay, do you have one right
Oh, yes, it's that
So
one.
can you try to hit those switches, Leo? What did you
Yeah.
have?
Thank
still-
you.
Are you still?
Emails?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you still johnspurlock@gmail.com?
John F. Spurlock.
Yeah.
Yeah, here I'll
Dang, bro, your email is the OG, fam. That's wild.
My email, what?
Wait a minute, this is not a pen.
Correct.
Okay, John, can I have a pen? I don't know why I keep going. This happened twice, bro. I'm giving up.
2 toothbrushes.
Megan, do you want to be on the chain?
2 toothbrushes and no pens.
Oh, I remember, when I was packing my bag earlier this morning, I felt them things and just threw them in there. I just thought those were pens.
That's so funny.
I should probably take myself out to Ox, because...
Four.
I'm confused, so what have you been flowing with the first 3 rounds?
What do you
I don't know what happened to
He's
it.
been flowing with the toothbrush.
Yeah, I know. I was like, if you're just now figuring out that you only pack toothbrushes.
As I found one in the round. I really did not pack one. Like, I kind of took an opponent's one. I mean,
Internet's all for
yeah.
Kinda
We tried.
I mean, like,
I got you.
I'm gonna go down a long string of white people taking from black people. I don't feel like doing that rant right now. So, I mean,
Listen.
I'm pretty sure it's a kind of took. I'm just gonna say that.
Listen, I was just making sure I heard you right.
Oh, yeah, 110% clear.
Okay. What's your order, Wardak?
You can guess the order, Megan.
Huh?
You can guess the order.
TK?
Nick Lepstrap?
Nick Lobster.
Alright.
What's the necklace?
Can I know what
2
it
in
is?
case.
2 in case.
Yeah, it's
Did the
So
email
TCAP case.
well,
Okay.
we don't really call it cap.
Oh,
Let's calm down before we start using that
Yo.
You not on the internet?
No, my computer's like weird.
You have to get on the internet.
I'm on the internet, I think.
Wardak.
Oh my gosh. Dead. I can't.
Facebook, you anti-black, yo.
It
Like,
is anti-black. I tell you.
there we go. Lit.
Everyone good?
Yeah.
Okay.
The affirmative has to defend a significant reduction in military presence in one of the more topically designated regions and reduce mission size. Sky 91 refuses not to equivalent and reduce the matter of Washington common understanding one cannot reduce something one not accepted. Accepts a precondition reduction and refuse to accept not the equivalent reduction. This distinction reflecting the dictionary definitions reduces the defined and conclusion in terms of mission size and military presence visible deployment of military for the purpose of deterrence is agreed 91. Establish a conceptual framework and develop the following definition of presence. Visible employment of U.S. military personnel under military deterrence. Includes any diplomatic, economic, social, psychological activities that have military component. Visibility is linked to deterrence of tree falls deep in the forest. There's no one there here. This may sound in the case for presence. The answer is no. Invisible presence constitutes serves no useful purpose. Deterrence is ultimate purpose of for presence. Now, vote name for predictable limits. The resolution presence states point to Taylor resource Schwartz. There are an infinite number of things you have to talk about outside of reduction. U.S. military presence needs to be possibly negative outside interpretation. That's the only internal link to topic education. Discussion of the military particularly important to challenge against the military tourism abroad. This is Ration 15. The study of the military should be guided by engaging with the force institution responsible. Critical engagement with the military and militarized institution be underpinned by understanding the institution accountable and open to exchange and necessity of academic leaders, community practice, process lose collaboration, military institution, critical military studies, responsibilities for change with the institution, critique or complex environment range of evidence, which may nuance of ways that the miscellaneous positions such as pro-race military may find hard to accommodate. That seems to be the point of this site. The reason for wanting to open up stations or engage with military institutions as part of the critical military project concerns issues of access, military related research can be quite different from other inquiry because secrecy and security in these institutions. Engaged critique may require much reliable and empirical evidence. This is a question of access to trust. This requires direct engagement military forces and critical approach to those encounters. Now the criticism. They presented a faulty history. Anti-blackness dialectically intersects with capital rewriting history along these lines. Necessary challenge to racial oppression. When I see this is young and says race oppression dialectically intersects with capitalism. However, I do not isolate these social sites from view race as a local problem. Instead, I vote for ground relationality of these sites within capitalism. Eradication of race oppression requires a totalizing political project. Transformation of existing capitalism. I foreground the historically determinate link between race exploitation. Transformation of race requires transformation of capitalism. What is ultimately at stake is a class matter now. This fits the line provides a discussion of labor production favor individuals that say capitalist violence, grammar, and wood 10. Common resistance to poetics limits the practice of poetics, encourages focus on individual creativity rather than wider category of cultural practices. Individual linked with poetics and collectivity through the resistance based on practice intention. Neoliberalism creates imaginaries are projected through works of art without this being the intention. It is difficult to use this approaches in the time of reading neoliberalism, argue for culture that emphasizes economic power, have social relations, standings to all aspects of production, and pragmatic understandings of history, rupture, totalizing narrative that surrounding class and labor reproduction necessary to stop capitalism is wood 97. Postmodernism is around conscious zone history, depending on denying overall meaning of historical reality, totally unity of capitalism. Structure has been replaced by fragments, contingencies. Not only do we have old grand enders, we have to give up any idea of intelligible historical process and causality. Since there are no history, so that will cause analysis, we not get into the root of many powers of the process stuff. It also reveal that it's historicism. There's little of these factions that help. There's a sense of poverty, homelessness, the ruling class, working poor, and so on. Now, that's the results of genocide. Those deemed lesser country member society is equivalent to the development process between all of the experience that really exists in modernization. Because money is not all accounts of heartlessly characterized capitalism. Will sacrifice the whole continents or subset of the population. We have little too late to surplus value to without compassion replaced with the calculus profit expansion. Now, the alternative to embrace historical materials and literal rewriting of history along lines of labor production and capital cost based incentives to produce violence. That's a prior question. The affirmative is 2 and 1. To know that every society to be able to act with such knowledge master first know that all know what existing social totality is systematically inequality, mechanics, gender, class, race, sexuality, disability, ethnicity, or nationality. They are all secondary contradiction modes that now explain the social inequalities pattern on the basis of these secondary contradiction and doing so legitimate capitalism. Such arguments are authorized capitalism, gender, race discrimination, that's accepted economic inequality as an attack of hard human society. Only orthodox Marxism recognizes the historicity of labor and privacy as the source of all human wealth. Any emancipatory theory has been found without recognition of the case. Individuals demand say to form an insurrection creates a hyper-individualized politics that causes neoliberals fulfilling this supporting and 14 liquidating authenticity represent to face the same way that individuals run to neoliberals organized to become optimized or so flexible in mold and substituting whatever profitable opportunity comes along, yet we are accepting in our activity and our pleasure and autonomy you have in choosing to be older or some older self or neoliberals or society often include themselves wasn't infinity and malleable liquidity is co-hires or simplification unconditional rather than thought decided to less pleasing is to be deployed values and activity authenticity can no longer be a particular situation or requested on demand. Now, blackness isn't always fungible, nor is it dare like this positionality is socially contingent and always subject to the possibility of change. This is Hudson 13, the very framework for exclusion. Inclusion nowhere engaged in ontological statements, political, most other sort nowhere decided evidence ontological fatalism might have it. See Wilberson, the social not be divided in white, black. Colonialism institutes and with this relation is contingently constructed rather than unfixing way this idea is an evil 7, but does not follow that the wood black being pushed to the ultimate substance of which all forms sociality, rest will guess all statistic black way this are sustained by continuing practice which can always be undone. Civilization produces a radical aspect, totalized its real has no place on the system is produced by it. Now articulating gratuitous violence and fungibility as the standard for academic participation ensures continuity of anti-blackness by co-opting its resistance academia as Hudson, McKittrick, and 14. Our analysis of history can actually honor repeating cherish anti-black violence or an analytic source of blackness and death. Citation of blackness calls for repetition of death. There seems to be no way out except for those repetitions and ask who the focus of these analyses to live up to a version of humanness that are necessarily excluded from one way. This logic kind of analytic thinking is to destroy naturals, draw attention to black thinkers on the ways in which blackness works against the violence that defines it. Now, the laws of constructive means accordingly deconstructible, starting from within the state is effective and it solves. This is Caputo 97. The laws deconstructible is the laws construct in the first place. The law, whether opposed from above the fiat, composed from lows, historically constituting such deconstructibility is a way to improve the law before power society rather than visit done on deconstructibility of justice. Now, it is legal to enforce after members of the back of the bus and deconstructor might not mean to destroy, but to loose to open up something so flexible. Deconstruction of the law render each other mutually, render each other possible. The laws not follow the sky because the laws are constructible, accordingly deconstructible. Now, reformism is empirically more successful than revolutionary insurrections against the system, and black bodies can actually access some to a varying degree forms of deliberative democracy. They have no historical data of insurrections working in a huge heterogeneous country like the United States in a more widespread manner. This is chasm in 11. When radicals make a big difference, they did so as partners in the coalition driven by establishment reforms. Establishment did not achieve their goal. No minute through civil war and parliament realized the process of emancipation started victory. Most of the universe finally able to get power until Roosevelt needed liberal votes. Only one by Johnson, the liberal Democrats, common fear of disorder and gave up the field of white South and black freedom is helping self-reliance voter rights act for implementation to gain major goals needs to win over section governmentally during just one period. Could radicals authentically claim to arrest more than a tiny number, ranks as long as the majority of the population, based on the voice of the left that amended from using the lines between men and women, Jewish women and girls, including the blacks. That's true. The abolition movement, the one that Phillips fought alongside from Douglas. It was also the case in the 1969 City Alliance, way through from the elite colleges, black people people mentioned for documents and held the court make law that he's a few Americans created to acquire radicals make all the most difference from rather radical law and the most demanded individual freedom and communal responsibility. Abolitionist feminists, Samuel Marx all quoted the Declaration of Independence. Now, saying debate is the current site of militarization ignores the current systems of labor and production that have made militarization around the world possible. It turns the criticism because it means that their history is fundamentally incorrect. Marxism dwell the world rests upon the back of the elephant. What is this? The elephant state on a turtle is a turtle that all the way down is a parallel like has a clear wheel never gets to the bottom thinks there's nothing at the bottom thinks if it's turtle all the way down. There's no overarching platform, only a local knowledge is shifted. The scale is estimated impact on the left. Socialism has disappeared. New designs of emergence place situations and localism, communitarianism, class, race, and gender have been imagined as spectrums rather than the binaries. The critique of capitalism has narrowed becomes left hope for emergence of class consciousness instead of challenging the structure of capitalism. The radicals now is trying to create specters of space of freedom. Brian?
Yep.
Now, specific contextualized discussion of the military best. Their refusal to do so makes any types of movements concerning the military bunk. This is Brian and 12. We need some military logistics aspect of things while more machines relies on. What I've heard is a complete difference in military logistics. That's people say this is horrible and just because it's a political say acts of the same, so it doesn't go very far. Then have points that maps the lines on the war machine is using to destroy them. There's been a number of things critiques of war machines. There was nothing changed too much. I object to your tendency to use a hammer to solve all the problems and see as a nail ignore the rules of material and display and the social assemblages. Anything else?
You give me the card after it.
Okay. Neoliberalism is pervasive approximate cause that infiltrates lived experience. It's co-op descent that one sees micropolitics invigorate post-Fordist productivities, Papadoulos today, micropolitics governance, everyday living, not serious, the vital political structures, micropolitics become integral, effective neoliberal governance, neoliberal states, not monolithic, contained, percentages, the most remain, road to raise everyday experience, social control, road through colonization, private individual existence, the body, neoliberal state needs, networks, actors, forge destruction, necessary for transformation, centralized state powers, seven neoliberal control, the trade, social cultural life, post-Fordist approaches, permanence, productive resources, relationality, memory, communication, creativity, body situation is the work algorithm, subsidization, work life, the heart of personal productivity, EMT, legitimate, domination.
You finish that card?
Yeah.
Okay. Give me 2 seconds and I'll send that.
Appreciate it.
Okay, that's it. It's just in the body of the email. And you finished both those cards, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Are you good? Alright, let's start on topicality. This card about critical military studies seems to characterize the affirmative's critical engagement with black people's position in the military as a site of challenging status quo militarism. So why isn't this characteristic of absolvency?
We still think that the devil is in the details, and you still have to engage specific policy options, have a debate about itself. It's not enough to have a monologue.
None of that is
policy.
supported in the evidence. The evidence is about critiquing the military's institutional arrangements and policies. So I'm wondering, like,
How the hell we know that?
can you just explain, like, what the importance of details would be for that?
So we should have.
Or, like, what sorts of details? Because the 1AC has a lot of, like, historical
Details.
analysis and details of what the military is doing to black people.
There should also be detailed analysis about how we, for example, we should have details. It should be a debate, though, not just details. It can't.
But, like, I
entirely
don't understand why you keep saying the AF is a monologue and leaves no room for debate. Like, our arg is, like, there should not be military presence. Like, black people should not be made to be put in Asia and the Persian Gulf and blah, blah, blah to fight wars for the white man.
Yeah.
Like that.
So what, are you saying you reduce military presence abroad?
I would say so.
Okay.
Alright, well then the cap flow. What exactly is wrong with the 1AC's history of...
So I think it comes out, like one of the bigger problems comes out in the very first tag of the first card.
Okay.
It comes
What's
out and
that?
says it's not just poverty, it's actually not poverty, it's not just homelessness, it's anti-blackness and white supremacy. We agree that white supremacy and anti-blackness obviously impact that, but it has to be, you have to see the material implications from class and labor reduction, how that shapes the realities of black folks in the military.
Okay, so how does the historical materialist account that you have presented explain the targeting of black indigenous folks for military enlistment? And you can't just reference here that they're poor because white poor people are not targeted at the same rates, and the recruitment packages
okay.
use hip hop imagery
Yeah,
to try to
so
get black kids and shit
You've
like
actually
that.
just given us two good examples of it. So our position is obviously not that class and labor explains all instances of racialized violence, but rather that it intertwines with white supremacy.
Okay, so you start
to
sounding like the
replicate
perm,
those kinds of
so you're
violence
gonna
as
have
well.
to explain
Yeah, our
why we
position is
should
that
ignore
you
race.
didn't write history to account for the ways that class does things
But
like.
the two examples were our examples, not your examples.
And we're
You
characterizing
didn't
it
explain
correctly.
the military recruitment at any point.
Well, yes, the justification for military recruitment is for your NAPR evidence. This is kind of I keep using the term, the kind of poverty draft, which seems to be a result of black labor being devalued, i.e. the idea that black bodies are put into positions of poverty. The problem with the 1AC is that it does not write history to account for the ways that materialism replicates those things.
Okay, cool. You want some prep, Liam?
Yeah.
Alright, I'm gonna start that right now.
Speech, I'm gonna be offended. At least flow your coach's speech. I'm sorry, but I gotta make sure these kids learn. Too much love for them. Shout out to Bottle. It's my first time being able to be on a live stream, so I gotta do this. And freezing. I'm talking 28 degrees. Caught my mixtape. I don't even know if I'm finna drop it, but I might as well get some promotion of it too. I'm just saying, bruh. It's gonna be that fire, bruh. You heard the 1AC, man. You know I'm coming with these bars on deck, bruh. Like, hit your boy up. Hit me on Facebook, cause I don't be on social media like that, bruh. I got 2 jobs and go to school, man. I ain't got time for that. But hit my line, man. If you don't know who I am, then I'm blaming it on him. Him being the cameraman. All right, for sure.
It's okay, Ricardo.
See, you know, I'm promoting my mixtape. I'm using my time.
I got
Thing
people
even unmuted
texting
right
me
now.
like the.
We ain't getting
He's a
sold. That's
communist.
one of their cards. They said hip hop gets sold. Nah. Copy for free, bro. I'm doing this in the streets. Like, what's happening? That's hella funny. That's actually my answer. Low key, too. Flow that. I swear to God, I can't find no cards, though. Oh, yeah, that's because it's in a different. That's my life. Oh man. Like, I mean, even the judge is kind of rocking something. So I mean, you need to let me know, like, what's happening.
$10, it's cap and framework. $100, it's cap and framework.
Someone made Tommy Chan.
Were people accepting these bets? Because
Man, a mo.
Alright, well,
Hey,
Thomas 2 and C might make
Tell
it
me-
seem a little bit different, but
Yes, we should affirm Berkeley's hair.
Man, all my jokes are about
Exactly.
I feel like they should be about this live stream now.
although don't commodify my blackness though, but affirm it.
Are
Don't
you
commodify.
are you reading comments or are you sending speech docs? I mean, I don't really care. I'm just curious.
I'm actually wondering
reading
if no one
comments.
cares.
You
I'm
send
actually
them.
gonna have heck of fun because I've never done anything like this in my life. So I am excruciatingly juiced. Finally, work paid off. So I'm no.
Excruciatingly juiced. Really? That was the term you went with?
Yeah, it's excruciatingly juiced. I'm about to say.
Go ahead.
Oh wait a minute. Last thing. Hey yo, TOC at large committee, bruh. I would only allow you to have 2 tournaments.
Like,
Two
not on-
tournaments
you're
you
not
let me
on
on, bruh.
national TV, yo.
I'm just saying, you got me messed up, man.
Okay, wait, this might be the best comment. I think Wardek individually has the biggest hair, but on a net team level, Berkeley has them beat.
that's probably
It's a
true.
friendship and team.
Sorry, I let you down.
All right, I actually found a way to get these cards. So paste.
There
Ta-da.
might be a debate going on right now. I'm not sure.
I mean, either way, they still having fun.
Are these comments anonymous or?
No, they're not.
No, I know. And what's
No,
funny,
no.
what's
These
hilarious
people
is
are-
half of them are people I coach. So I'm about to y'all aren't slick. Like this ain't working. Like y'all tripping. All right, so tell me if y'all got the
Cards.
Is it just the one card or are there multiple?
There's 2.
I only got one card.
Damn.
Oh.
Are you sure?
Yeah, Bata Juria.
Yeah, I don't know how to say it either.
We had to do this in the last round. Everyone together one time. Bhattacharya.
Bhattacharya.
No, Bhattacharya.
Don't think I even got it. Well, I don't have internet, so I didn't get a doc or anything.
Well, damn.
Wardek is going off the grid for this one.
Oh, so I'm doing all this and y'all ain't even got the dang internet? Y'all.
I have the internet. I appreciate it.
Okay, much love. So I'm gonna put that last card in there. I swear to God, if anybody wants to sped up at any point, just let me know. Like I'm actually just having hella fun. I've had very successful last few debates, so luckily I had the young John Spurlock backing me. Yeah.
I got a card. Is there anything other than the Bhattacharya card?
I just sent another card.
Yeah.
That's Zizek.
I just got it.
Ooh.
I've never read Zizek before, so I don't even get the woes.
I have also not read G-Check before, so.
I'm just saying, we out here. I'd say everybody else making fun of us. We a dying breed. All right, so it's gonna be case T. They don't want me to call it CAT. I'm gonna call it historical materialism Marx shit.
There you go.
I'm gonna call it the cap guy.
But it asked for it not to get called.
Nick might change my mind in the Tennessee, but right now,
I mean,
you know. So fine. You can always change my mind later. What did sorry, I got distracted. What did you say the order was?
It's case T Marxism.
Got it.
Cool. Let me get that timer note. So I guess I'm gonna start by answering that again. Alright, for sure. Alright. Where's my case flow start? There we go. Cool. So first, I'm gonna be able to start off by saying what they have. I'm gonna be able to put on the case flow is probably the most asinine shit I've ever been able to. I'm going against them in a 3-0 debate. When I talk about the idea of individualizing on politics right now, we already said that what we're gonna be doing is a necessary collective of power, and we're giving examples about I'm black GIs, and which means that we do in fact have this grain of historical analysis. While they try to say that we're gonna be able to be deprived of it, and also they say that they'll say that they made claims about how blackness is not fungible. I'm sorry that you're not able to be able to read the general Wilderson blocks. We never actually even claimed that blackness is always going to be able to be tied to actual fungibility. We just say that there's a necessary antagonism that is to be able to happen within militarism ends up happening between white and black bodies that we said we should be able to probably end up being able to destroy, which is literally the only thing we end up having. Is literally the Wilson shit makes not a lick of sense, not a dereliction of sense. Hey, that wordplay though. All right. And they talk about supposedly only performance are going to be able to solve. I'll be able to answer that on the T-flow because I really don't know why I wasn't on the T-flow in the first place. And I say, they said that blacks should be able to have some formation of debate, deliver democracy. It's always still going to be on there. But let me go I'm a little bit further down. Yeah, actually, no, I'll just go to the T-flow because all that shit can be put on the T-flow. No, I'm going to go on case. I'm sorry, I'm horrible. All right. Militaries will be able to stop the internal rebellion by being able to brainwash and being able to make niggas into a cannon fodder and be able to push a notation that only white folk get being able to matter, being able to brain washing and making us live in the battlefield literally starts up in the schoolyards and places like actual debate which will be necessary for the actual space and reformation while they simply will decide to be able to maintain the status quo with the alienation of actual myself, the pro-whiteness of the military during enlistment and recruitment to be able to pitch back bodies against other people of color, but also at the same time against themselves. Like I ended up being mentioned with my rap also. Car rights and my projection is actually going to be inherently it's going to be hella powerful and said that being able to find a way to be able to turn the gun and black sheep eyes and be going against that less no radical potential malady of not no longer being subservient and be able to spread this ideology is going to be spread of a radical thought against some hegemonic framing on some straight up Philip shit that we was giving on you and then war needs to be able to remain, we need to be able to remain equipped and be able to have map ourselves particularly we said that black women is going to be inherently going to be able to keep the insurrection. They give actually no way to be able, hey, but I'm going to say that we can't solve it. I'm going to be able to put even more of that on the actual T-flow. See, that transition would have been so much better if I was actually like at the top of the T page. Not bad. All right. Our interpretation is that we're going to build real political thinkers, and we should actually be able to do what's best to be able to have help out disenfranchised people from our actual position. I'm like after now, I'm the north side we've been able to suck, and it's going to be always inherently unfair for niggas. I'm tired of being able to tell the kids that they're telling the coach at the urban debate that they need to be prepared to actually have balance in it. I'm having it on their bodies with a very activity they love, and the fact that what they said is the raps are going to supposedly going to be called insignificant. They're always going to be able to be criticized for being able to be untopical. And if anything, we probably are topical. Because the analysis they end up being able to give the sense that we need to have a significant reduction of a military presence, which is still something that's necessarily going to happen when you get black people out of the damn military. When we give them all these different cards, and I talk about just how much of a significant piece that we are, and also when we need to be able to destroy things like counter recruitment strategies. Also, now onto that one card by the Charya, I messed it up again. newly, just about what is newly framed with that's able to close at radical or anti-racist politics. There's been able to be moved away from the radical imagination of politics of race towards some highly institutionalized activity, loss of a larger vision to be able to diminish the anti-racist politics, to be able to be exclusive to focus on the institutional detail of revolution, which must be able to find a way to transform and maybe be able to find a new subject of reality, which will be able to merge from them Monday techniques of actual management to be able to tell to by formation of racism within the field of racism attempts to be able to tend to be able to limited demands of technological and legitimize a state of anti-racism. The focus on is going to be allowed for Russia simply be able to make recommendation. Is anti-racism actually going to be able to is never actually going to be able to matter, but the organizational adaptation and not why social transformation, the live approach of actual abandonment. And also, before I go into their cap K is actually a direct contradiction to framework on some GJ shit. The assumption that we be able to fight against the actual access to be able to take place on the familiar the democratic frame to be able to democratize capitalism is going to be able to send it to democratic control of the actual economy, which is going to be able to go on question with the institutional framework of global democracy, which is going to be able to go on a question under. Yeah, I just said that. Also, Marx is real freedom to be able to reside within the apolitical network of social relations from the market to the family, where we need to be able to change it in order to be able to have improvements. It's not a radical form, but it says it's going to be able to change the social relations within production that we do not be able to vote on certainly on one's own relations, but instead of the workers will from manufacturing. Such things are going to be of the left as a process outside of the sphere of the political, and it's going to be an illusion to one that can be able to change the standard formulas of democracy. Now onto the cap flow.
Can you say quick before you do it?
You talk. I talk in your speech. Say it.
Okay. Counterinterpretation means that the affirmative has to discuss the topic, even if discussion of the topic, not a topical discussion, which is the only way to develop debate towards revolutionary politics than reformist ones. The impact is the F.
Cool.
Moving on.
Cap. All right. Race is not attack of how people are going to be able to make money. It's going to be a primitive formation of accumulation of different types of massive populations, unless a racial group which cannot be able to be found. Something that's going to be economically beneficial. Also, there's going to be able no benefit and easy to be able to be comfort them and saving blacks, which they give them no specific example to, because the myriad of time has literally been able to enslave by simply being able to brand white people. And even if some particular reason why we don't even be able to have our analysis in our rule clause claims, we're still going to be able to say that racism is not just, or it's not, it wouldn't even be a result of capitalism, but instead it's going to be a pillar of capitalism, how modern day capitalism has the ability to circulate and wouldn't have the ability to be able to find a way to exist without it. For instance, without slavery, there's no cotton within the Industrial Revolution is going to be able to be possible, because the proletariat within the factory is going to be able to be devoid of necessary materials, and the cotton ends up being the cotton goes to the factory, and black needs to be able to be murdered simply for being able to have social coherence, and that's going to be a reason why we're going to be able to check the capitalism violence and isolation of blackness is going to be repositories of violence that always ends up being able to work is always beyond the limit, and that's the rate. This is a factor of essentialism to be that creation of a new system, which to be able to claim and be able to hold safety from the previous workings of the Lord of the peasant. How I'm slavery ends up being able to create a specific and ideal practice of individual, which will particularly be able to problematize the idea of capitalism and the American genome of freedom, which cannot be previously born from the position of the peasant and the Lord, because of one as necessary stake within that actual position. Thus, they're saying that race is going to be an inherent turning point. And after this norm of cycle, we better be able to suck in and F Trump. What's up?
You should read this card.
Yeah, I'll read this card. All right.
I sent it.
Okay, cool. Touting class is a fundamental stance for left identities able to marginalize racial movements, and the app is going to be a DA to the K. This is Ross 2000. Left and urge to be able to go back up into class crafting a political, but left does not be able to allow for the existing of racial divisions and allow for them to start the proposition to possible to be making persuasive appeal in the interest in unemployed men and women to be like, regardless of the actual race, going to be able to support the program, economic justice to be and standing on the left it depends on whose left side you're actually talking about. Touting class or economic justice is a fundamental stance to be able to left identity is going to be just another way of being able to tell everybody else to shut the hell up. And I'm a leftist white person going to be living to the actual claiming we believe blackness towards them. I'm a promise I'm a land of I'm leftist. I'm a man is going to be able to the dreaming claim of both women's, and I'm a person and I'm a number of complex. I'm a different. I'm a rationalization of economic class is going to be able to remain in the formation of identity. I'm a straight middle class. I'm a man that can be able to find himself comfortable being able to claim himself as a leading voice. He may sometimes be able to overcompensate say by simply being able to scream, and that is the only way that the identity is able to really matter. Also. Fuck it, let's do a permutation. They ain't got no links anyway. Shit, just perm do the shit at the same damn time. See if I can put one thing on the cap.
Their historical materialism doesn't even attempt to explain military recruitment of black people and the poverty. I don't know.
You always talking to me about it. You can talk to them. So yeah, that's all that let's just move back onto the case flow to be able to all right. So lastly, well, on one case before I end up being able to wrap this up, they say that supposedly, I guess it's kind of on Cap and on them case in weird ways. It says that supposedly rap has the ability to be able to be bought, or be able to sold. One is not getting bought in this space. What they talk about is simply the fact that it ends up being able to have sellability. That's not anything that's going to be unique to my particular performance of hip hop. If anything, is going to be a particular radical for a formation of me being able to interject on my actual ideas and being able to have my say. It's not. It's really just makes no actual sense within this damn debate round. It was literally just saying, oh, rap gets bought. Good. So does cocaine.
We should take some.
I'm so pissed. The thing froze. Giving a fire speech and then hate when that happens.
Oh, is this the shit you were gonna say? Or this
No.
is the shit you did say?
Yeah, it's weird because that's the thing.
We're
No
gonna
one
go
stopped
like
and then went to the bottom of the doc, so I read up the document and then back down the document.
Okay.
Maybe I shouldn't use Google Docs to be able to do my speech documents off of.
We good?
Oh yeah,
Okay. So, your Ross evidence, it talks about your Ross evidence. There was a line in here that actually sums out the card of we shut you up when we talk about class. What is the bright line for this argument to be a dissat to the criticism? Can we talk about class in general and its intersections with race?
I think touting class as the fundamental stance for left identity is the link, which you have done pretty clearly. That's a quotation from the evidence.
Okay, so can you give an example? Okay,
So our argument, the
Matt-
Ross evidence is making an argument that's not about history, but about political organizing. He's saying when we develop strategies of persuasion to try to get people involved in politics, how should we approach that? And he says, even if the Marxists are right, we should not go into political organizing spaces only talking about class because it always reproduces white privilege.
Okay, so there's the line. Only talks about class. The alternative does not only talk about class in terms of historical materialism would talk about the implications and how labor production mixed with race. Why is that uniquely shutting the discussion about race up?
Do you want me to say something, or you want
Yeah.
to answer it?
I'm about to. Yeah.
Well, the thing is that the alternative doesn't do that. The alternative has conveniently latched onto our analysis of the military's enlistment of black people, but presents no account other than there's poverty as to why racism happens or functions, and wants to reduce it to a purely Marxist analysis, which our Ross evidence says is fundamentally alienating to black people in political movements.
If history shapes praxis, what is the praxis of insurrections that the one in collective like Black GIs look like? Because it was a historical.
I'm pretty
accounting.
sure we gave a very big historical example when we talked about what was the Korean War, and we talked Vietnam. Sorry, I keep messing these things up. But yeah, the Vietnam War was literally like a wholehearted ass example of black GIs turning the gun there, or being able to make themselves no longer.
Or you could talk about Rose's War, slave rebellions during the Civil War that directly resulted in the defeat of the Confederates.
True.
All of these are examples.
How does that look in current military deployments in places like Iraq and other parts of the GCC?
Well, I'm sorry, I don't necessarily. We gave a pretty modern example of that. So it would look like them still being able to run away. I'm sorry, I haven't been to Iraq to give an exact particular example. You're giving way too much call in particular.
So they would. So one of the so being AWOL, going AWOL is functionally one of your arguments.
Going AWOL, fragging commanders, not targeting the enemy, shit like that.
Okay.
Those are examples of how you do it in the military. However, the second part of the AF, outside of the military, counter-recruitment, educational spaces, discussing how the military makes it so that only white bodies matter. It's a dual strategy.
True.
We'll take prep. Are we?
I think Kane, damn, quote of the year.
Malachi?
It's
Who was it? Who wrote that?
It's
not-
Who the heck? Okay.
Yeah, no, I just have to ask.
Oh, okay. What's up?
BRB.
Yeah,
This is so
You have five.
funny.
It's the K in case.
Who are any of these people?
I mean, they said Leonard is 2 A goals. I mean, they ain't that bad.
Yeah.
Of course.
I affirm you. I think what's getting worse is we're giving them shout outs in the speech that are just doing it even more.
You are totally adding fuel to the fire. That's 100%.
Hey, yo, man, tell your friends, bro. They gotta see the mixtape promotion. Like, get me out of here.
What did you say next?
Yeah,
Pain.
wait.
Okay.
Ricardo,
There's
you
no
gotta
review,
post a
okay.
link to the mixtape in the fucking stream, dude.
We're before and say that it's not a tap pay.
Okay.
Would rather.
Sounds good.
We just have a
Whatever.
concert at the end of this.
It probably doesn't really matter if it
This
is
is
or not.
so, I'm,
It's
like,
really-
it's
he
so
just
yells.
suspenseful.
It's
That's
2 hours
amazing.
of concert.
Lindsay just yells at me a lot.
I
Every other
mean-
time anyone calls it a
What?
cat case,
You don't
so
say.
I know, right? I just want to.
Carlos over here commenting.
So
Just
it's
wanna make
just
her proud.
just the K, right?
And case.
Okay.
Yeah, guys. I am 2 A. Alright. Just mess with my priorities of what I need to be doing right now.
Alright, I'm ready when you are.
Anyone not good? Having a proper understanding of history is the only way to counter violence into its capitalism is pervasive and not static. It rapidly works itself to infiltrate other possibilities of collapse and utter failure, which means that being anti-capitalist is not enough. Occupy was anti-capitalist and failed. Seattle protests anti-capitalist failed. USSR anti-capitalist and failed. Only writing history correctly and point out the method that system of class and labor production can be used to replicate violent systems based on whether or not they're linked to the cap, whether they have written history correctly. Any chance they have introduced a faulty history that misidentifies how capitalism has infiltrated anti-black violence means that advance the negative out because it proves they only served invite classes violence back in history. Obviously, they talk about instances of capitalism doesn't historicize such shit. So sorry, live stream, but this is the history of the cabinet. But the speech is going to be littered with examples of how class and labor intertwined white supremacy to explain violences. They're all linked because they prove that they misunderstand how history operates. How history operates. The first story of their history operates. There are plenty of examples of class creating racialized violence. Slavery was heavily influenced by academic incentives. Since African slaves were less likely to coalesce with poor whites in revolt, and since the colonies needed European immigration, they couldn't enslave European people because otherwise people wouldn't voluntarily immigrate. Because African continent is getting torn up by Western corporations for REMs and rare jewelry like diamonds. Toxic dumping sites are located near poor communities of color because their land is deemed less productive and less valuable than land near rich white neighborhoods because they can't build shopping malls there for people to buy a bunch of shit there. The constant reinvestment process of capitalism makes gentrification inevitable. White hipsters movement historically brown and black neighborhoods. The reason that black and brown bodies are forced in the military is because of socioeconomic disparities. That means the only way they can get a job. This not for evidence is the best example of this in this debate and why I guess when Across the Nation talks about the poverty draft and the promise of $50,000 in a college education that draws black and brown bodies to the U.S. military. Insurrection may fight those systems, but the problems of those systems are too powerful for insurrection to do anything about, which is why understanding the epistemological foundation for how they operate has to be a prerequisite. And the reason why there's high crossover between military and the prison education system is because people brought in are systematically undervalued for what they can produce. That's not true. That's true not just for black bodies, but also for Native bodies. For example, in the Vietnam War, when the army was in Vietnam War, when the army forced Native bodies to fight for them, and they had to do it because their labor was less valued. When the army is almost entirely volunteer, the poor people of color are heavily influenced, are greatly more diverse than just black bodies. Now, just black bodies. Look, the problem is not that. The problem is that blackness today is a major part of all those violences. But our point is that it's not the only thing that does those things. The alt says you should evaluate black thought and production. DC's white thought too. You just don't do it along the lines of blackness, but you do it along the lines of class and labor production because they provide data that are analytic for how those bodies face parallel discriminations. Being black is less useful than the idea that the way the bodies have been produced is actually important, which means that the kind of intertwining policies that replicate systems of anti-blackness through capitalist structures is the prior question to the affirmative, not anything about whether they're anti-capitalist or not. They talk about slavery that obviously had racialized factors associated with it, but there are certainly economic factors associated with it well. As I already gave above, we'll give an example of modern day around racial slavery. I.e. Vietnamese fishermen, they enslave other Vietnamese fishermen as free labor on labor boats, keeping people at sea for months or years at a time with no pay, even though Vietnam is a homogenous country, which means that slavery cannot be solely propagated for racial reasons, but that classic system of pressure for how all those things
operate. There's also a reverse causal claim, i.e. white supremacy cannot explain corporate violence. Because there was no one understood the difference between races until European imperialism and labor demands on plantation farming was met through the use of slavery itself, which proves that the alternatives are prereq to the Inferno, but not the other way around. Here's a better rereading of slavery along lines of class labor. Alexander and the radical philosophy offered African Americans most promising was practical and creating a larger corporation of wealthy leave the privilege of common rights to keep poor whites, blacks, Latinx, American fish, made hatred because while the nation keeps on financial opportunities to the sex of the population, the alliance between poor whites and African Americans, conservative rates of pride, whites, racial laws opposed these barriers designed to encourage lower class whites to retain a sense of superior blacks, laws, or another racial representation, where leaders will leave the classes to direct against the racial partnership to result in populist leaders to align themselves with conservative history, soon repeated such as the place, will lead a sense of general life between poor whites and black folks, pagans, relating to the racial casteism was emerged. They say that racism is not a result, but it operates through capitalism. That's literally our argument. The position is that there is not a root cause claim for how these things function, but rather they intertwine, which means that writing history to account for the ways that they have replicated those violences is necessary because it lets us understand the method that capital is historically used. Basically, the idea is that history repeats itself, so understanding how and why capital repeats itself is key to defeating it. You cannot defeat an enemy if you don't know anything about it or how it operates, which means that the epistemological investigation is obviously prerequisite to the Inferno. That's to me no evidence. They say the proletariat is devoid of the material, which means that we can have a revolution, not our fucking alternative, so I don't care. They say factors of essentialism, this kind of slavery is a pragmatic result of capitalism. That's obviously true, which is the example that I just gave above about how is a pragmatic justification for going to Africa and turning them into slaves, which is why writing history along those lines is actually a prerequisite to the Inferno. The next argument is this piece of Rasa, real quickly, they have considered the external impact of the capitalism. They say like a criticism, it's called a capitalism, whatever. Class and labor production caused genocide of those bodies not deemed productive enough by civil society and labor product expansion, which includes disabled bodies who are not productive as factory workers. It includes gay bodies who are not productive because they can't reproduce. It includes black and female bodies. Labor has historically been devalued, etc., which is the causal evidence means that we actually consider large external impact insufficient. Proximate cause claim, rewriting history, results or impact by sufficiently pointing out the historical junction method which class infiltrates and essentially defangs those abilities to do that, which proves that we should outweigh the criticism itself. Now, the Ross evidence says that touting class destroys those movements. The problem is that you cannot have a successful movement because you don't understand how class shuts down those movements in the first place. A bunch of empirical examples how this operates. The Black Panthers conducted a sit-in in the California government in the 60s or 70s to stop bills restricting gun control rights for black people, but the government just passed those bills substantially faster because there were economic and labor-based incentives to create those kinds of bills in the first, which means that they have provided a faulty revolution movement idea argument because class has written that you replicate those kinds of violence, which means that they are ineffective and misunderstand history. Writing the method through the lens of capitalism is necessary because otherwise they just become the marketing tool for those systems. Capital loves to take revolutionaries and turn them into tools of the system. Hip-hop and punk rock both started as massive counterculture movements that sell it to the system. Rastafarianism was a spiritual counterculture movement that now basically only exists on t-shirts. You may not have known you sold out until you have, but that's the insidiously pervasive nature of capital and why a sole focus on or why understanding systems of race through the lens of capital, not understanding cap through the lens of race is a necessary starting point for challenging those questions and why the alternative is preferable to the permutation as well. And that also is the explanation why the perm makes no damn sense because it understands the vice versa question. Now, they say the other problem is that the framing is short. You check out the sorry, everything I just said above about why capital explains race, not vice versa. Give me an one. Classical different generation can be considered to the system of oppression or racism, as system of redeeming these classification, type of exploitation, where age and social racial and forced of class and the regency remains just when oppression with others. The intersection of revolutionary strategy, oppression, classification are apparent importance. People desire to determine within argue class and was not reduced to a racial oppression class, but to acknowledge the main power of the reduced sexual directions class power. Now, every single example of economic components that they misuse the class infiltrates the average, just hacking on after we call them out fails, and i.e. that the permutation doesn't do anything. Flint, Michigan started with average just get clean water, but people got taxed for it because the corporation displaced profits onto them. Anti-coal movements in West Virginia were trying to be pretty successful, but then coal companies have started painting themselves as green and still continue removal mining process. The feminist movements branched out after the feminists would seek to try to get women out of the household, but the problem was that there were a bunch of women who already couldn't afford to be in the household, which meant that class rewrote how those things happen. All which proves that there are a bunch of empirical examples why rewriting history is not something you can just tack on. Has happened prior to the affirmative. I've already explained why epistemology comes first, which also means they don't have any justification of the permutation in the first place, because they haven't provided an affirmative that justifies those things. 1% risk relief also means the severance, so you should reject this. Less than 70 disses or criticism of their methodology, which is which means it's impossible to negative. I've already proven how a system of labor and production explain how military recruitment operates in terms of black bodies, which in terms of black bodies, all of our historical examples above and rewriting of the app means that we resolve this question anyways. So the case. Blackness is not ontological and says social condition articulates different bodies in different instances, i.e. a poor black woman experiences violence substantially different than a rich black male does, which means that A, there are any kind of overarching criticisms are not socially valuable for creating any kind of movements against white supremacy, and B, that or any other instances of violences like class into the history of the affirmative is particularly relevant for actually challenging how anti-blackness operates in the real world. The horning piece of evidence is tagged as individuals in court, but I think the black GI's example they give is a pretty good example for writing history lines of class and labor perfection is important. First of all, is the prior question how they get there in the first place, i.e. why they are pushed in the military. It's because there is a poverty system of poverty where black bodies' labors are devalued, means that they are substantially they're in poverty in substantially large numbers. The explanation I gave above in terms of the NAPR evidence probably explains that pretty well. The other reason is that the reason that black GIs were put in that situation, means that epistemology comes first. Yeah, I'm just ranting at this point. So he's also indicated that his yeah, no, I'm good. I'm good for cross section of y'all are.
Yeah, there you go.
So why can't a movement trying to be able to dissolve militarism and like a historical material analysis not coexist?
Well, our argument is that the pervasive nature of capital means that it infiltrates that movement and co-opts it before you write history correctly, which means that
Explain what that co-option ends up being able to look like in regards to this debate space.
Well, I guess we've got a bunch of empirical examples that would probably explain how to operate. So, for example, the Black Panthers who tried to conduct
So how does that end up working
in this debate?
I mean, nothing happens in this debate space, so I'm not sure why that matters.
Right.
But regardless, like there's a system of commodification associated with ballots that explain how like your labor is valued. The kind of rap example we were giving in the 1 and C about like the
what was
aesthetic
that
value
rap
being
example that
commodified.
you were giving within the 1 and C? What was that Rastafarian punk rock argument?
Oh, that was just like there are counterculture movements that get co-opted empirically. So the punk rock and rap music argument was that like started as like counterculture, like
so
started as like counter
to be able to make a disadvantage to. And by the way, I'm not actually trying to cut you off.
No, you're good.
To some extent. But yeah, like, is that supposed to link into how I performed within the space with my hip hop?
No, it's more like the method of the 1AC is insufficient.
So was the method performance?
I think that's up to you.
Okay. Then wait a minute. Then how do you? Okay. All right. So I guess let's move on to something
for sure.
else. Onto the case flow.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about how supposedly like we can't be able to talk about mutual experiences between the rich black male and the poor black woman. Can you explain a little bit?
Well, our position, or it's not that you can't talk about mutual experiences between them. It's that when you don't isolate class as a starting point, you don't understand those experiences operate.
So
like,
in that case, if I was to compare a poor black woman to the experience of a richer white male, would that then be a time to be able to interject race within the analysis?
We don't think you shouldn't interject race into the analysis between a poor black woman and a rich black male.
Okay.
That's not our position. It's just that there are differences outside of anti-blackness that structure those relationalities, which means that any kind of overarching social death thesis kind of arguments are incorrect, even if you are using it as like a method for
overarching social death.
I think the way you worded it in the 2AC was not so much that blackness is ontological, but rather that it's a useful skill or useful tool for getting the kind of movement together. Our point is that that's a bad tool for getting that movement together, and also that class infiltrates how those things operate. So if you were to start making that argument, it would be faulty.
All right. So you covered cap and case on deliberative democracy stuff, or did I just miss that?
I did not make any deliberative democracy. We haven't made a deliberative democracy argument in this debate.
Did he literally say deliberative democracy? Okay, whatever.
I mean, like the Kazan card says the word deliberative democracy, but like we don't have it in that.
All right, cool. It's like 10 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah, just sending out some cards.
Eric, I'll be back in 5 minutes, son.
Yeah, that's how this debate has been going.
Are you on the internet? Because if you're on the internet, then
Wardak has never been on the internet.
He's been on the internet. His just hasn't been on like the email or something. I don't even know.
Damn, fam.
Up. I just sent it to.
who did you send it to?
I think I was just about sending it to you.
Spell out space and read the Rasta argument. Probably the best thing that's happened all day.
Gonna reply all.
Reading the comments.
Ricardo, you're almost Leonard's level of awesome.
Almost.
And let me jump back on this one, but I just thought that was amazing. All right.
Okay. Should be sent. Maybe.
That ain't the best use of downtime on motivation. That definitely says 7:26, so that's not good. 7:41.
So it'll be
a new sheet of paper and tea.
Wait, are you saying that as two separate things? Okay. I thought you were saying it like
A
tea
new
on a
sheet
piece
of
of
paper
paper, and I was
tea.
like,
No, everything's on tea.
Actually, everything's on tea. Put everything on
We
tea.
don't.
that's
we don't,
good, because I don't
we
have
don't need to
any
mess
other
around with
paper,
this
so
new
I
sheet
wasn't
paper
gonna pull it on
Yeah, I was about to
paper
say,
anyway.
this is my last sheet of paper. This is my last sheet of paper.
Okay.
I mean, okay. Got a pack of whiteness behind us.
Everyone good? Okay.
No, I didn't get it.
I didn't realize you were recording the stream when you said that thing about my facial reaction to the
Oh yeah.
I thought you were just like
No, I don't think that.
so we're just doing T, right, Warder?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alright, cool.
This said DA. Okay. What are you doing?
Are we good? Megan, go to the second argument. It's the we made argument. There's two things I'm going to extend. It's the interpretation that reduce means to reduce means to decrease in size. The second interpretation was that deterrence is a form of presence that assures allies and deters deters adversaries. That was the guy evidence. Which means that we're going to read a disadvantage right here, and there's a guaranteed link out of it if they actually make a we meet, because it literally is the arbitration guarantees a form of deterrence double whammy. The Iran deal and planned shatter Saudi confidence. The U.S. caused Saudi to nuclearize Goldenberg. 15 U.S. found ways to signal partners that Iran committed to security is important to maintain a robust military presence in the Middle East. Domestic president will reassure the partners the U.S. Iran's committed to their security. Providing confidence will be a useful tool dissuading lashing out, while it can also reduce the likelihood that Arab states will pursue their enrichment capability and use it to withdraw the assets to shake the confidence of the Arab states. Now that causes cascading nuclear proliferation in the Middle East, causes nuclear wars. Color November 13, if radioactive acquire nuclear weapons, hedging could lead to polynuclear Middle East with profound consequences. Crisis would increase options of second strike capabilities. Early warning CNC, so this is really a geographic proximity. Distrust could produce regional nuclear war now. Extinction first, Kaminsky, United States wins last, sacrifice individuals from overall good by the side, soul of the ones who are the cost. We feel that if we actually fail to take into account the well to persons, each the only one left who bear the cost of interaction, the actual solution to the dilemma involves maximum promoting the lives and liberties of as many beings as possible to control constraints require a non-value based rationale. The originals have dignity that transcends any value. One may have to sacrifice some to save many. Now go to the top of the debate where the interpretation is. I'll give you the counter interpretation. I already have the counter interpretation. I'll do the limits disad here. Absent a discussion of decrease in the U.S. military presence, I will always change the topic to be a self-serving threatening the negative from ever keeping up. There are two ways this gets propagated. One is nothing links. So the affirmative says that educational spaces are good. Black folks get disproportionately recruited, and it'd be really good if black people could go AWOL and not have face any consequences. Listen, this is obviously a factually accurate statement makes it impossible for us to debate. We don't get core generic topic decides based on geopolitics or allies because they don't reduce enough military presence to make a fact. We don't get the conditions counterplan, the consult QBQs or advanced counterplans because no one talks about that in the literature. Talks about just their mechanism. They don't talk about their mechanism, or they don't talk about the overall effect of that would have on military efficiency. There's no topics and criticisms like legalism or apostasy, so they don't defend the topic, and we will always speculatively into a we can't get an impact turn to the act that says their military presence is good because they don't because there's no one in the literature who talks about that. The only ground we get is a defensive claim that insurrection doesn't do anything. That's just defense and not a reason to vote to win the debate. It means we can't get an opportunity cost against an act that only says black folks to go into the military. That solidarity among the oppressed is good. The affirmative is the equivalent of saying gravity exists, but we don't know whether it pulls up or pulls down, which proves that gravity is a bad thing. Here's the actual clear bright line. We should be able to actually debate about it. The affirmative, not just a topical discussion that they labeled it. Remember, it's a debate, not a conversation, which means that the fact for that definition cannot defend a factually accurate statement. The act has to use any method of knowledge production reflection or affirmation that would allow us to have a sufficient debate that in the literature in order to have an effective debate that provides plenty of accessibility with leaving us disaggregate the ability to say surveillance good, so we actually keep a topical version of the app. You can literally go into Saudi Arabia, you can say kill all the white people, you can allow all the white and you allow the black people to go AWOL, as well as any other people of color that you want, which solves the entirety of the app and guarantees a debate about, because it guarantees the disab links and at least some sort of criticism, because there's a large amount of presence that is gone. There's no one who talks about deterrence in terms of there are no more POCs there. Now the prep disad, I'll do that here. Perhaps for casings goes away from how they relate to the resolution to what type of theory do we think it'll defend based on what impacts they defend. And for two impacts, first, that's impossible model. Because those who will never keep up. And second, following that, say OK teams and political theories is pretty messed up. Internal link terms of their claims about radicality. The only things I'm going to say now is the two arguments that they make is that framework KO's anti-racist policies that makes no sense on this, because we didn't have a USFG topic. The topical version of the app literally resolves this, because it means that you don't have to defend policies. You can be the insurrection. You can literally kill all the white people and make all the black people can go AWOL. This gives us our disad. The other topic, the next argument is that you destroy radicality. We link turn this topic. Link turns that because it means that we can have a large radical debate overthrowing a giant part of military presence, which means that we would probably link turn that argument. It just means that we have a topical discussion about this argument, which
CAP doesn't contradict framework.
Oh yeah, CAP doesn't contradict framework. I don't have to really argue. The framework card is a Zizek card that says liberal democracy is bad because it doesn't question whether liberal democracies should exist at all. This doesn't link to our T interpretation. In fact, we allow for more radical, subversive types of acts proven by our T version arguments, which means that we actually link turn this. We let you put fire to the feet of military troops who are not black POC who are coerced in the military. You literally see fuck white people and get the hell out, which is a topical version of the affirmative. It just means that we have a sufficient disad grounds to talk about it, or whether we can say revolutions are bad, which we can't even say because they're not really a revolution. They're just an insurrection, which means we can have a revolution versus reformism debate, which is a good principle.
Rewriting history does not preclude a discussion of military.
Rewriting history doesn't preclude having a discussion of military presence, Is there anything else specific to that argument you want? Okay. They say we do short counter recruitment strategies. Again, you should view all of their offense through the layers of we link turn all of their basically radicality good arguments. They didn't really have a fairness for human argument. I'm just going to extend topic. That's good enough, actually. Okay.
All right, cool. We have 8 minutes. Can you start that later? Cool. mind if I take that just for a sec?
Go ahead, man. It's your ball.
Okay.
I don't know if you asked that about native lands, but.
Leo, I'm trying to have a little credibility just for that. Okay.
You want to run settler colonialism,
The case.
I learned it from you.
The case is gonna go at the top, and then topicality, and then the criticism.
Case TK. Range.
Very good.
They have functionally dropped the affirmative. The only argument in the block on case is that the affirmative does not think why black people are in the military in the first place. Yes, we do. Our NOPR evidence answers this, and much better than the the negatives account of how military recruitment works. One, there are material structures of violence that result in the funneling of black and brown bodies into the military that include economic disenfranchisement, but are much broader. They are completely ignoring the military's role in incarcerating black people during the LA riots, stealing native lands during the Indian Wars, suppressing slave rebellions throughout the 1800s, and creating the conditions of disenfranchisement racially that precede and prefigure the economic inequalities that the negative is so fucking focused on. The second thing is the ideological conditions, which they have not talked about for the entire debate. The NOPR evidence says that the mattering of white bodies is enforced by white supremacy to justify the production of Black Death for the protection of white life, which means that we have an explanation of why poor white people in the military didn't revolt against their commanders, because, as Stokely Carmichael says, they were not fighting for their life. They wanted to save America, not destroy it. This means that blackness is the only positionality from which insurrection can authentically emerge and be able to destroy America. This means that we have the only way to truly turn the gun around on the institutions of violence and create revolutionary change. Top count. I'm gonna deal with the DA first. Goldenberg is some racist bullshit. The Center for New American Security is the arm of AIPAC to create bullshit policy knowledge and stoke up threats to shut down Palestinian claims for land and reinforce the protection of Israel against the big bad Muslim threat. All of this justifies the production of black and brown death for the protection of white life, which means that the affirmative is an impact turn to this notion of otherization. It also pits people of color against each other by creating the good brown people, bad people dichotomy, which gets in the way of revolutionary international solidarity, which is the only way to challenge hegemony. You've conceded our Phillips evidence that hegemony is genocide of the world, which means that your fucking impact on the CAPK, which is genocide, you just linked into. Also, the pro-lift discourse is racist because it presumes that the non-Western nations can't handle their nuclear weapons without going crazy and launching them all right as soon as they get them. The logic that extinction is the only risk for impact calculus links to our NOPR evidence because it only cares about impacts when they come back to hit white people, when in fact the people of color across the world have been dealing with the impacts of militarization literally for centuries. This is not just some offense that I'm making casually. I don't care if they go for the DA. It's a reason they lose, that they think they can come out with some revolutionary capitalist politics but then present the military-industrial complex's racist Iran threat construction to justify the affirmative, to answer the affirmative. Now, topicality proper. We meet. They have not defined the United States federal government. They just say we have to reduce military presence. We advocate that black military presence should be reduced, and our insurrection is designed to destroy the military altogether. They say the affirmative is obvious and a mere lecture. This is not true. We are developing tactics for resistance, which means that you should be engaging in a debate about whether those tactics are valuable and whether there are ones that are more effective. The we meet arguments all go functionally conceded, and the topical version of the AF is our explanation of why we are topical, which means they don't access any of their preparation or limits disads. Our counter-interpretation solves all this offense because forcing a discussion of the topic means there's a stable point of discussion, but the topical discussion can only be of ever be a disavowal of blackness, which is...
the version of the app is us a little bit more.
Yeah, the Chi version of the affirmative is us because, like he said, we don't advocate for government policy but advocate for an insurrection that gets black people out of the military and reduces military presence. Only this thinking of the topic from the position of the unthought can scandalize the debate community to force its politics in revolutionary rather than reformist direction. This ethical stance is far more important than the theoretical procedural impacts. This is the Bhattacharya evidence that says that a radical anti-racist imagination should prefigure any other political considerations. The Zizek evidence has also conceded that forcing deliberation and democratic structures of liberalism causes capitalism, which means they have double turned themselves. Now the criticism. What history have they presented that resolves the problems of all the previous failures that he lists at the top of the 2NC? Only the affirmative does that by integrating the question of blackness as the key site of insurrection. Newsflash, we are not all enslaved, and your genocide impact does not occur to white bodies, which means that violence is not on a level playing field. The root causes that he's making are not even explained. How do we know why the racist lawmakers shut down Black Panther sit-ins is because of economic motives? The root cause, thus, is less important than the proximate site for political insurrection, which we have said is blackness, which means that racism and anti-blackness function as a pillar of capitalism, not the other way around. The Knopper evidence is they are ignoring the second half of it, which secures their white identity by only talking about class. The Ross evidence is phenomenal on this and says that we should think about political strategizing, not who has the more interesting account of history, and that their class-only stance allows white people to feel comfortable and reproduce privilege while alienating black performance. You see this quite literally in the 2NC when he says the alternative isn't the revolution, so I don't care about their argument. The I don't care is white insularity from politics, and it shows you never saw it because the affirmative is actually revolutionary. Now, when they say capitalism commodifies culture, you act like Leo doesn't already fucking know that, and you don't do anything to solve it. You just tell him to stop performing. What does that do?
805.
How long did you say you have?
8, or 750 now.
Okay.
I'm still going.
Yeah.
What people say.
Dang, where's stock for your stuff? See, it's not about skill, it's how petty you are.
Got you, I got you.
You trying to help? Just kidding. Don't put us no comments on there because we're way too in the comments, bro. I prefer.
Is it muted right now or not?
I just unmuted it.
Oh.
At what point?
Middle of you.
Middle of rant?
Probably right when he was saying, don't post any comments.
Don't post any comments on what to go for a 2 and R. That was it. That was weird. So just seeing that. Don't do that.
Can't forget that.
For some reason, I feel like Nick isn't actually paying attention to the comments of the live stream.
I might get bored and look at them later, but
There you go.
I'm not very
You won't get bored looking at them.
I'm gonna get bored of looking at him later. Alright, where are we going?
TK case.
I hate this shit.
Spurlock is
channeling
David
Dave
Arnett.
Arnett. What the hair? No.
Oh my god.
Do that.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, dang, that was a shot.
Alright,
Okay.
fuck it. I gotta recover. Let's move on.
Damn, alright, give the roadmap again. I'm sorry.
TK case.
Appreciate you.
Alright, cool.
Everyone good?
I'm great.
Let's do it.
You are not going to drop an analytics retcon kit. We are destroying them on the specs of the alternative solves and examples question. We solved the impacts question. If you right power away from this, you have no ability to solve hegemony when you have conceded that you don't ever access your movement in the first place, which I will explain a little bit more on the criticism. Class rights hegemony to create intervention because of oil interests and economic incentives means the alternatives rewriting the history accounts for this impact probably better than they do. Probably better than they do. It's also a substantially different impact than their instance of hegemony. Yes, the hegemony genocide upon Iraqi bodies, for example, is not the same thing as genocide of the working class in America or other nation, which means that there is a distinction between those impacts. Impacts the capitalism does not contradict framework. She checks as a liberal democracy is bad. It's not a link to our interpretation because we are not a TUSFG, but rather a T-military precedent, which means we have a better subversive question. This rewriting history doesn't preclude discussion. Military precedent, which is all this question. Anyways, obviously not going for topicality because concede we need arguments means that there's no other risk of opposite here. Anyways, criticism conceded the framing issue that capitalism is pervasive and not static. It rapidly warps itself to infiltrate other positive movements and co-ops them to utter failure, which means that being anti-capitalist is not enough. Occupy was anti-capitalist, it fails. Seattle protest, anti-capitalist failed. USSR failed, which means that writing history correctly and putting out a method of the system of class and protection to replicate violences. They have conceded the epistemology first question, i.e. if you don't understand how the enemy operates, you don't know who the hell you are fighting or how to fight them, means that you cannot do anything, which means that their method fundamentally fails because they don't have an ability to fight the overarching system that replicate instances of anti-blackness in the status quo. They don't go for a permutation, which means that that's a presumption level argument that you should vote negative on right now. Megan Edwards, you have been seeing the Nate Lab strat enough to know this is not a capitalism criticism, rather a historical history criticism with a net benefit of capitalism, which means that all of the billions of examples I've given it will give throughout this speech are to explain how our link and alternative explanation, because that proves that A, they don't understand how violence operates, and B, our alternative properly understands how violence operates, means we have a preferable method for how these things happen. I think that functionally answers their first argument about how the historical materials resolves those previous questions. The problem is that if you don't know how the enemy operates, you can't ever fight it. History repeats itself, so understanding how and why capital replicates itself and what historical junctures it does so is necessary to defeating it. Which is what the Tumino evidence about. They say the genocide is not upon white bodies, it probably is actually upon white bodies, but whether it is or not is regardless, because it proves a significant proximate cause of their ass impact claims, class and reproduction cause. The genocide, those seem not productive of the civil society. That includes disabled bodies who are not productive workers of factories, gay bodies who are not productive for reproductive purposes, and black and female bodies whose labor has historically historically been devalued by system of class labor protection, which means that we estimate large external impact and sufficient proximate cause the case should probably just outweigh the affirmative. Regarding history along the lines of class labor protection resolves that by pointing out the historical junction of the method which does so and defangs those purposes. The next argument is that root cause is not explained. It's not a fucking root cause claim. I don't care. It's intertwined of how capitalism and white supremacy create these kinds of impacts in the first place. The reason why Black Panthers were shut down was because of economic incentive for the government to keep functioning. Regardless, it doesn't matter the incentives for it. Our point is that you don't address the kinds of structures that the epistemological structures that kind of mean that movements actually get co-opted and don't do anything. The Weather Underground was an anti-capitalist movement that bombed a bunch of stuff, but never understood how capitalism operates. Because it terminally failed. Hip-hop music and punk rock was originally counterculture, but never understood how class replicates itself, which means that they got commodified and are now sold on T-shirts and sold on a bunch of albums and stuff, which means that they have presented a faulty movement to resolve instead of white supremacy, which means that rewriting the method through the lens of capitalist necessary, because otherwise it just become the marketing tools of it itself, which I've already explained above. The number evidence is absolutely a negative card. The conclusion, negative card. The first one, the beginning of it talks about the poverty draft, i.e. the economic incentives that force Black and brown bodies to be in the military in the first place, because they are promised $50,000 in a college education. If they do so, if those labor and class-based incentives were not there, they would not join the military, which means that we have a sufficient proximate cause argument for these how things operate. The conclusion of it says you need to address the larger structures of violence that cause military recruitment. That is labor in production. For the example that the number evidence gives at the beginning of their piece of evidence, they say this Ross piece of evidence. We are not a class-only focus. You're articulating racism through a classist lens, not classism through a racist lens. Is what the permutation was. Which, by the way, still is not here. But regardless, our problem is that there is a prerequisite question to this argument. Having class cannot destroy movements if classism itself does destroy those movements in the first place, which means that the status quo triggers this impact anyways, and that the alternative is the epistemological question has to be a prior question of how these things operate. Since we have how these things operate, there's a bunch of proximate causes that explain how these things get intertwined. The African continent is getting torn up by Western corporations for REM and rare jewelry like diamonds. Toxic diamond sites located near poor communities of color because they are deemed less productive, less valuable than land near rich white neighborhoods, because you can't build shopping malls there and make a bunch of people buy a bunch of shit. The constant reinvestment process of capitalism makes gentrification inevitable. White hipsters move into historically black neighborhoods. Our problem is not that class explains all white supremacy or vice versa, but that those things get intertwined, which means that understanding the historical junctures that make them do that is a prerequisite of those kinds of questions. You consider the slavery example, modern day non-racial slavery, i.e. Vietnamese fishermen, they enslave each other even though it's a largely homogenous country for years at a time, which means that slavery cannot be solely propagated by racism, but can be by class and classism. There's also can be by classism, which means that we have a better alternative question for how these kinds of structures operate, which means that we are prerequisites to the affirmative. The case proper. I've already answered in terms of the criticism. The alternative is a prior question to any kind of insurrection, any kind of movement, any kind of action in the debate space, because you don't understand the epistemological question that replicates instances of white supremacy anyways, which means that I could not answer the rest of the case and we would still win this entirety of the debate. They say that we can't explain how riots and repressing slave rebellion operates. Those labors were deemed valueless because of classism. Riots against civil society meant that shopping malls and stuff were being destroyed. Slave rebellions were rebelling against those systems of labor, which means that we have a good proximate cause how these things operate.
Alright, we had
Like
6:40.
something.
6:40.
Yeah, 6:40.
Are you want to talk now, or you want to take some time for you?
I'll be back.
Okay.
Alright, so this is a weird ass thing. We're gonna call this case then, okay? What did we work on?
Sure.
Let's call it that.
Case and K?
Yeah. This is where I might be Leo, Petra, and John on the first three.
I'm ready if you need me.
Alright,
But I think you're gonna be fine.
I do too, but I mean, this is a simpler debate that ended up being able to make the same. If I can try to simplify it, I might not need 6 minutes for that. That's why I got young John on the ones and twos.
So first, I would like to be able to start this 2AR off by being able to say that we do not need a perm when literally the first words of our 1AC say that the idea of the task that we're coming for is going to be something that's going to be inherently twofold. The folds into being where we must be able to attack both materialism and we must also be able to attack racial circumstances. With anything is probably a permutation. They literally end up being able to be the affirmative, but they're us half-assed. If we can be able to prove that blackness is going to be a necessary site, which I'll be doing later for this 2AR. Then that's simply going to be able to give us a win. So basically, we're getting a win. All right, bro, you can't even you cannot be able to continue to go to shit out 10-second examples about any type of warrants about how supposedly that you end up being able to cause formations of revolution. Good job of just confusing me and the viewers. We knew the analysis of how blacks are being able to particularly important. I'm going to be able to necessarily turn it around because of the multiple sites they end up being able to occupy. I'll do. I'm gonna work on this later. Once again, that is why we be able to claim racism is going to be a pillar for class distribution, which means that literally if you have no race, you can't be able to distribute necessarily class problems, which is going to be inherently problematic when we talk about the idea of recruitment strategies of how they cannot be able to come to answer why poor whites aren't necessarily going to be ones being funneled within to the military, but instead it's going to be something that's going to already work from a position of blackening because as they end up being conceived, which I know John put on, but I put hella time over my 2AC, is that literally to be able to have social coherence, you need to be able to have black death. Which is why we end up being able to get a funnel over to the malignant space to be able to turn into actual cannon fodder. And then there's also no explanation why you're simply going to be able to why the alternative is not going to be able to be any different from fucking Occupy. You have no empirical examples against us. We however able to speak about it black GIs. We use literal examples where you can't be able to show your politics work, how you be able to separate yourself from the different moves that Occupy end up being able to make. Now, however, before I end up being throw John on the ones and twos, there's a couple claims I need to be able to make. Well, one's going to go over to a particular piece of evidence. They claim that supposedly they can be able to have claims to not evidence. That's going to be some bullshit, and here's why. The poverty would not only do what I said why whites aren't already going to be targeted, but also how black protesters end up being able to get shut down by the military within the LA riots, which is an example of when it ends up being completely dropped when the military will get literally be able to be deployed on our bodies. It's not they talk about ideas supposedly white genocide happening. Bitch, where, nigga? Like, the end of that shit does not end up being able to happen, and particularly ends up being able to attack black bodies. Please, I'm isolated, so I'm a time where black people, white people end up being able to get literally bombed by the fucking military. I'm a bomb in Los Angeles doesn't end up being able to happen to white people also. You know what I'm talking about? Okay, what the hell was I writing? I said Gouda. What the hell is Gouda? That's some Oakland word. That's some Oakland wording. All right, for sure. You don't decide to be able to talk about you talk about how this has to be you simply only being able to do this work of actually being able to science black people, which is the next piece of evidence I want to be able to talk about is how the idea of being able to have white class structures literally ends up being able to say shut up to the idea of black examples and in particular black experience literally is being able to be manifested when he says that I don't give a damn about your revolution. I just kind of want to be able to sit and here and talk about class because that particular thing is the only thing that ends up being able to actually be I'm able to affect whiteness, which ends up being able to function as literally a white cry out, which our Ross evidence says that it's literally going to be shutting idea of black lives up, which is inherently necessary when we talk about the particular violence that doesn't end up happening with white people, which is once again why you need both the materialism and the particular black examples to get the full history of violence. What's up, John?
So they dropped from the case flow that white people did not revolt against the military during the Vietnam War, and that the white peace movement only resulted in reformist political strategies. This was the logical conclusion of their alternative, which says that there is no racial politics at play when the California state government shuts down the Black Panther Party. It's just to keep the engines moving, which presumes that if we had a different economic structure, there would not be any need for those sorts of revolt. If we win the necessity of revolutionary violence against American civil society, then the alternative's peaceful politics can never be able to resolve that. Blackness is the key site to turn the gun around. The site of insurrection. That was the 2AR. That was
Yeah.
the top.
We gave hella empirics on that. Is there anything else you need to say? Because like I said, there was so much damn repetition from these
I think-
What's up?
Answer more of this argument that he says that they're not only class, but about the intersection of class and race, and like,
That's us.
say, yeah, not only the AF is the intersection of class and race, but also anytime there's any articulation of a unique black political strategy, i.e. the hip hop shit, and then they say that gets commodified, don't do that, is always a tactic to shut up black political energy in favor of the universal class politics, which dissimulates
And speaking
the
of that,
specificity of blackness.
and speaking of the universalism, they can see the type of otherization and impacts it ends up being able to turn
Yeah,
black people
true.
against the idea of people of color that are going to be overseas. So when they
They
get
have no way to solve for revolutionary
Yeah.
solidarity.
Exactly, and we talk about the spread of those Western ideologies. So probably when you give the example of Vietnamese fishermen being able to supposedly enslave each other. Not only do I have a couple of doubts about your example, but however, that's still going to be the spreading of the very same otherization that we end up being able to talk about as the affirmative idea of this racial pathology that ends up being able to be inherently problematic, a matter of in all instances, and being able to be reinterpolated and reperpetuated literally amongst the globe. Once again, that's some race shit of how that particular race is lesser. Notice how they couldn't give no example about white people getting thrown into slavery. This is going to be a big problem. So, want to do an interview?
It's good. We got 10 seconds. Let's just kill it.
We gonna kill it. All right. I mean, we gonna.
Give them your final words, Liam. What's a hell of a drug?
I mean, it's not that cocaine is one hell of a drug. I don't know.
Good debate. Good debate.
So appreciate it.
Can I see now? into the military, which I feel like it's just not the way you want to go into an R, because the argument that I feel like you're going for is class and race are intertwined. If their evidence is like, yes, class and race are intertwined, here's our like, you know, twofold approach to how we deal with that, and that's what the AF is. I think that means that probably the AF solves the impacts of the K. Now, I paused on, like, I think that you're probably winning the argument that there's like this external impact of how other bodies, like disabled bodies and gay bodies, are devalued because it's based on what you can produce and not produce. I'm not exactly sure how to weigh that. So I don't think that either side is giving me an argument as to how to weigh the impacts. But I think that the affirmative is making a consistent argument as to how white lives mattering means that Black death is what gives social coherence, is what creates social coherence, which means that I think at the very least that hedges back against the external impact. I also think that in order to access the external impact, you have to be winning a stronger link. So like, end of the day, I'm just like not entirely sure why the 1AC is not already an analysis of how race and class are intertwined. Yeah, I think that if you have a warrant as to why the discussion that the 1AC is having is different than what the alternative does, I think that puts you in a much better place. I think that a way you can do this is that you have a lot of like really good examples throughout your speeches, but they're not contextualized to the AF. So I need to know what about the alternative is different than the AF. Like, if the alternative rewrites the way that the 1AC understands history, then what does that look like? Like, I don't know what it was in the 1AC that the alternative takes issue with.
Okay.
Yeah, if that makes sense.
A lot more sense.
Which I think ends up working out like a no-link argument. Because I think their argument from the 1AC is race and class are intertwined, and I think your argument sort of shifts to race and class are intertwined, which is not creating enough distinction between the two positions. Yeah, I think that the 2AC should pull examples from the 1AC specifically and be like, this proves we are already the alternative. Yeah, I think in general the AF gets too lost throughout the debate. Like, it's sort of like the 1AC is packed with a ton of reasons why class and race work together and also work with other structures to force people into this. Like, by the, like, even just by the rebuttals, no one is talking about, like, the draft and the way that that functions and how that functions within a capitalist and a racist system, right? And so, like, those sorts of discussions completely go away and just sort of becomes like a, which one is the root cause? And then neither of you end up going for, like, we're the root cause. Like, you both just end up going for structures work together, which I think is what ends up being, like, sort of the problem. So, yeah, I think there just needs to be a distinction between the alternative and the AF, but I think that you also need to use your AF much more offensively.
So I guess I realize now how I explained this wrong in the debate. I guess when you started talking, I was like, what the hell, Megan? And I thought about what you said, and I was like, this makes a little more sense. The way I was trying to explain the alternative was kind of rewriting all of history, not just the history of the AF.
Okay.
I guess my concern is I'm not sure how the AF rewrites history. But given if you understand the alternative, and maybe I'm just putting words in your mouth right now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you understand the alternative as rewriting the history of the AF to understand how class and race are intertwined, then it would make sense that the AF is that rewriting of history. But I guess if the point of the alternative is rewriting all of history, then that's the kind of distinction I'm trying to go for.
Yeah. If the alternative is rewriting all of history, I don't know why that means that, like, the AF is bad, right? So I don't know what the AF, I don't know what the link is. Like, I don't know what the AF has done that is incorrect. That is an incorrect analysis of how history is full of examples of race and class working together to force people into the military.
Okay, I think